Castles in the Sky, a war game of flying battleships. We're easing gently into the piping hot water of World War I naval combat, complicated by the aerial factor. This game could probably be used as a straight World War I naval combat game, but I wouldn't know because this is an entirely new genre for me. Kind of a new era, the whole modern era, 1900 to the year 2000. I don't do a lot of gaming in that time frame. So given that I don't have a lot of experience with naval war games that don't involve huge sheets of canvas, we're going to go very easy. Probably going to go spend a lot more time on the introduction to this game, play through 2 or 3 turns, make sure that we understand how the general processes work, because there are some mechanics in this game that I'm not entirely comfortable with. And then we'll jump right into a full scenario later. But there is a lot of preliminary paperwork and dice rolling that you need to do before you even sit down to roll for initiative. So I want to go over that in a little more detail today. And then in future videos of Castles in the Sky, I'm just going to do all that off camera, get everything built and ready to go. And by that, what I mean is these are irregular miniature warships, the Sons of Uranus and the Sons of Mankador, but I can never remember what it is. Mancaris? I don't know. Look it up. You actually have to look at their starship line. If you go to the starship page, all the way to the bottom, you'll find these airships. And you can use these for science fiction surface ships, too. They come with little turbo thrusters that you can glue on. What we're looking at here are 2 forces. The boys in red are going to be Task Force Weeb Hunt. I built this using the Japanese fleet from Castles in the Sky. There are 9 nations. As I said, this is pre-World War I, so you get things like the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Ruskies, the United States of America, the British. One of the things to be aware of is that you have basically, like most naval war games, you have 3 kinds of ships. You've got your battleships, you've got your cruisers, and you've got your escorts. Today, we're going to play a battle between 2 escorts and a cruiser. I don't know what these ships are supposed to be. It's too small and a medium, so that's what we're going to call it. Each of the cruisers, the escorts here rather, are going to have identical stat lines. But we got 2 of them. So as I was saying, there's a little bit of logistics you got to handle before you get there. So our cruiser here for Task Force Weeb Hunt, the Japanese, this is the Kasuga class cruiser. I didn't give any of these names. And we got to figure out how good the captain is for all 6 of these, as a matter of fact. After you've purchased your forces, but before you've rolled for initiative, you roll on a command dice chart. And command dice are largely used for initiative, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the first turn. Notice, for the Japanese, you roll a d6, and on a 1, you get 1 command die. On a 2, 3, you get 2. On a 4 or a 5 on the die roll, you get 3 command dice, and on a 6, you get 4 command dice. The Americans work a little bit different. For the Americans, and this is Task Force Yankee Doodle, we've got a Denver-class cruiser and 2 Bainbridge-class destroyers. Don't worry about all those stats. We'll talk about those in a minute. The important thing to notice here is that, we'll go left to right just so we can compare them. For the Americans, when you roll that d6, you get a 1, net you 1 command point. On a 2 through 4, you get 2 command points. And then on a 5 and a 6, you get 3 and 4, respectively. What this does is it increases the odds, right? Our Japanese commanders are going to be just slightly better because on a 4, they'll have command of 3, and the Americans will have a 2. That's really the only difference between these charts. What that does is it provides an interesting sort of balance to these 9 army lists that you've got. I want to take a look real quick at the French Republic. They use the same chart as the Japanese. The British, yeah, this is what I figured. Look at the British. And I don't know if you can see it. It's a little far away there. But on a roll of a 1 or a 2, you get 2 command dice. 3, 4, you get 3. And on a 5, 6, you get 4. Yeah, I wonder if Eric Farrington is British. I actually have no idea. But the British have very well commanded ships, which I guess is historically accurate because they are coming in at the tail end of the British Empire, just before they've passed the baton to the Yanks over on the other side of the pond, the former colonials. So let's real quick take a look at this. What you've got is an armor, hit points. You've got a speed 2 to 6. Basically for all the ships in this game, the bigger ships can make 1 turn at 45 degrees. The smaller ships can make 2. All of our ships are going to be able to make 2 turns They're going to be able to change heading twice per turn. Of 45 degrees each time. And then lift is basically acceleration. You can change your speed or your altitude by that much each turn. And so that means we have a little bit of tracking to do. Now, we talked in a previous episode about how we're going to track altitude. I'm not going to talk about it again today, but that means that we do need to be aware of what the individual speeds are for each of these ships. I don't like the way I've prepared this Army roster, but if we go to the back page, this is an Osprey book, and so what you'll find is a really beautiful picture, but these are advanced roles for the campaign. They give you no help on quick reference sheets or Army rosters. They don't even have anything up on the website. Hard as it is to find, hard as it is to believe, not a lot of support for this game on Osprey. Well, this is a somewhat obscure game, so I'm not too surprised. Again, I don't think anybody else has played a game of Castles in the Sky on the YouTubes yet, so we're breaking new ground as far as that's concerned. I guess the next thing we could talk about is the fact that our bigger ships have more guns. They have to worry about the fire arcs, and we'll kind of talk about how all this works. We do have point defense systems, and we have bombs and torpedoes, and again, we'll talk about those as we get to it. But it's going to be a real small scenario. The last thing I want to talk about, before we go any further, let's roll some dice. Let's figure out what the command dice are for our Kasuga class cruiser. We roll a d6 for that, and on a 2, we have 2 command dice. And for these 2 ships, they're identical, so it doesn't really matter. I'll roll the dice twice. One of them is going to have 1 command, and the other one's going to have 5. That means this bigger guy right here with the 2 stacks, that is going to be the flagship because it has the highest command. It's got a command of 5, the other has a command of 1, and the big ship has a command of 2. So I'll add those down here, and then we need to roll for our Americans. The American big ship has 4 command dice, and those 2 smaller ship have 4 and 3. Wow, so in this case, the Americans are much better led. Bear in mind, the command dice, well, let's just back off. We got to take our time, right? Got to ease into it. I'm just going to set these 2 ships up. I'm actually going to reverse it. I'll put the Japanese over here on the west and the United States on the east, and we'll just say this is a little meeting engagement somewhere over those vast blue tracts of the northern Pacific Ocean. As far as their pacing is concerned, I'm just going to kind of line them up. But the big question is, how high are these guys going to be? And for now, I guess what we'll do is we'll roll some dice. They're all going to start at an altitude of between 1 and 6. So on the side of the Americans, the flagship will be at an altitude of 1, and the 2 little guys will be at an altitude of 4 and 3. So that's 1, 4, 3. And then for the Japanese, we'll roll for the big guy first. He's going to be at an altitude of 2, the other guy at 3, and the other guy at 4. Here's our positioning. You can see our altitude bands are very easy to tell. If you do not have any of the colored markers, then you are considered to have been landed. So we've got a guy at 1, we've got a guy at 4, and a guy at 3, as you can see. We also need to figure out our starting speed. Once again, I'm going to roll d6s. Everybody has a minimum speed of 2. If you are going slower than that, you're in big trouble. Maximum speeds of 6 across the board on the Japanese side. The Denver-class cruiser has a maximum speed of 7, and these guys have a maximum speed of 10 down here. I'm just going to roll a d6 for each of their starting speeds. It's going to be 2, 4, and 1 for the Americans. And shooting right down the line, it's going to be 2, 3, and 1 for the Japanese. And already we're learning. It turns out whichever ship has the highest armor value, which is going to be our cruisers in both cases, that's the command ship. So when we roll for initiative, I'm going to roll 4 dice, blue dice for the Americans. Remember, our flagship has a command of 4, and we're looking to score successes, a 4 or better. And whoever scores the most gets the initiative for the turn. So the Yanks get 2, and the Japanese get 1. Now, we set those dice aside because those become command points that can be used to issue orders, which are kind of like power-ups later on in the phase, or in this first turn of the game. The Americans opt to go first. We're going to alternate ships. You pick one, you activate it for movement. Once we've completed movement, then the Americans are going to select a ship to fire first. Now, we will work through all of the firing. All 6 ships will fire, and then we'll figure out what the damage is after we've figured out who's taken damage. So the damage is all applied at the same time, even though we work through the 2 hits and how many damage points are applied simultaneously. Movement It's a little complicated. Remember that our Denver-class cruiser for Task Force Yankee Doodle has a speed of 2. The first thing I have to do is determine what his new speed is. He has a lift of 2, so we can increase his speed to 4, and that's what we're going to do. But I got to show you how this game works, because they talk about move units. They don't give you any inches in this. Now, in my case, I'm going to use a half an inch for each of my move units. All ranges, all movement, they're listed in MUs. And when you decide you want to move, the first thing you do is determine your speed. Then you move in a straight line its current speed. You can turn at any point in the movement phase, and you can change your altitude once. One altitude rating per rating is lift stat, which again is what you can increase your speed by. You lose 1 movement unit of speed for every altitude gained. Now this raises the first question in my mind. With a speed of 4, I can move my Yankee Doodle up a total of 2 inches. I can turn at any point in there. And if I decide to raise my elevation by 2, it reduces my speed by a like number, which may affect movement for the rest of the turn. So I think what that means is by increasing my speed to 4, I can move to here, turn about 45 degrees, move an additional 1 inch to here, and then raise my altitude, and my speed drops back down to 2, but at least I'm at an altitude of 3. I don't know how important that is before. I've never played this game. The Japanese commander can likewise, he starts the game at a speed of 2, and he decides that he has only a lift of 1, so if he wants to raise his altitude by 1 to match the Denver-class cruiser, then he will still be able to move 3. Now, we'll move him his 3, we'll turn him 45 degrees, and then we'll add that additional point of elevation, which drops his speed right back down to 2. The nice thing about this system is I don't have to actually move my lift in order to change the elevation at all. So that's pretty much how it works. The only other thing I'll point out, we've got a guy with a speed of 4 here, and he's just going to move ahead 2 inches. He has a lift of 2, so we'll actually increase his speed, and we're going to move him up. Now, here's something that I should point out. You have to move 2 move units. In my case, that's 1 inch, before you can exercise your first turn. So we turn him about 45 degrees, and then we can move him another 2 inches. And I believe that we can then turn him 45 degrees back on his original heading. There's no rule that says all of your turns have to be in the same direction. If he decided to drop down 1 elevation, he could still only change because he has a lift of 2, he could drop down 2 points of elevation, and that increases his speed by 2. So it's slow to climb, and then you can come screaming out of dives, which is why elevation may be your friend. But again, most of these ships have a maximum elevation. In the case of the escorts, it's an elevation of 9. In the case of the cruiser, it's 8. If we had battleships on the table, most of them have a maximum elevation of 7. That becomes important later on when we're shooting, but let me go ahead and just finish my movement. The last American is going to increase his speed by 2 and maintain his elevation. But first, this escort will increase to speed 5. We'll move him forward 1 inch. He turns to that heading, and then he's got an extra 1.5 inches of movement. The last American will go with his full speed ahead at 3, and then he'll turn about 45 degrees like that, and this last Japanese ship is going to increase speed to 3, so he can only move 1.5 inches. I may decide that my move units should be 1 inch. I'm not sure. That may make the table feel really small. I should also point out, I don't know if I said this yet, these forces are built on a total of 13 points, army points basically. They call them something else in this book, but most of the scenarios you'll be running 25 points. So this is a half-size game. And the only real, and again, I haven't dealt with any objectives. As usual, the Osprey Blue Book series includes a number of different scenarios, raids, convoy escorts, patrols, all kinds of different fun stuff, but we don't even understand the mechanics of the tactical game, so we're not really stressing out about that just yet. Everybody's moved. Now the Americans get to fire, and here's where we have to take a look at our ship rosters. The Denver-class cruiser, we're going to start with the cruisers. We'll just go back and forth. He has, you will notice, we've got to worry about the firing arcs. He has a medium battery that can fire to the bow, the port, and the starboard. And he has two of those. One can fire to the bow and one to the stern. Port and starboard, it's just the 4 fire arcs. Notice the firepower has 4 different numbers. These are 4. I got to look this up. Basically, the first one is point blank range. If you are touching another ship, that's your point defense. So here's point defense is really good at close range and then is useless at longer range. The medium batteries have more firepower at close range, less at medium, and can't be fired at long. And then we'll talk about what power means here in just a moment. But first I want to point out the way the fire arcs work. Because it is a simple 4 fire arc system, he can fire, his bow gun can fire through, basically he can't fire in the back 90 degrees. Again, his stern gun can fire out of his back 90 or either of these. He's not facing the right direction, so he's only going to be able to fire with one of those medium batteries. And those range bands are up to 4, 8, and 12 inches, measured from the center of the gun, so nobody really, so he does not have anybody in his fire arc. We will use this to our advantage, and we'll just kind of show you who, so he doesn't have anybody, but the Japanese do. So we've fired here, and there's probably some rules I'll review it about. Well, listen, if I declared that I was firing at the American, I got to look it up again. If the American cruiser is firing at the Kasuga cruiser, it's at long range. Oh, everybody's out of range. We got to get within 8 inches to be able to fire anything. So I think this is the only guy that can fire, and that is at medium range at 8 inches, and he can fire. And I guess these 3 ships are the only ones that can shoot. So let's just work our way 1, 2, 3. Remember, you roll for firing first, and then you worry about damage. These 2 ships are at the same elevation. So let's go ahead and worry about that one first. They're both firing at medium range. And in the case of the American, they're firing with a light battery. So we're only going to roll 1 firepower die. We have at the port, the starboard, and the bow. So we got 1 bow gun, and that's about it. But we do have a torpedo. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Let's fire the guns first. And like I said, we only have 1, so we're going to fire. We are at this. Now, here's where the elevation comes into play. We have 1 die that we're going to fire to here. If these guys are at a different range band, in this case, the American destroyer firing at the Tsushima class cruiser, he's on a different range band, so that's -1 per elevation, different elevation band, we're at -1 die. So instead of rolling 1 die, we're going to roll 0 dice, and we're going to miss him. He's too far away and at too great of a range. However, we do have a shot here with this American cruiser. It's off his starboard bow, so we do get to roll 1 die. And I think that's about it. We don't have any friction markers, which we'll talk about later, so we roll the 1 die. And also you have to worry about the class. All of our ships, these ships are in the same class. Remember, that's our 3. Battleship, cruiser, escort. Battleships firing at escorts. Battleships are firing big guns. They have a hard time tracking pukey little ships, so they have to roll 2 fewer dice in order to hit those. But because these ships are both at the same class, we don't have to worry about that. And our 1 die of a 2 is a miss. We're basically looking for 4 ups. We do have one other thing we can do, and that's fire our bow torpedo. Torpedoes have a speed of 18, and they work a little bit different from the direct fire. Torpedoes move up to their speed rating in a straight line, 9 inches like so. Oh, you know what that means? And we're going to use the actual model. You have to be pointed directly at the model, which means, and this is an interesting artifact of the way this game is written, had our Japanese battleship or a flagship been aligned 90 degrees, it would present a much broader profile and would be easier to hit with the torpedo. Because they are bow on bow, you really have to pay attention to lining that up precisely, which means you may want to move second in a given turn, even if you roll the initiative. For now, our torpedoes miss in all cases, so we're done with everything except for this Japanese class ship firing at the American ship. And in fact, he may be able to. Does this Tsushima have? He does not have a torpedo. More's the pity, because I think he would have missed anyway. But he does have two light batteries, one in the bow that fires from bow to port, and one that fires from bow to starboard. So he actually has two batteries that can fire, and they are, well, I'll be darned, they are within 8 inches, so they will be rolling a total of 2 dice each. The same range, same class, so that's a total of 4 dice, looking for 4s, and we get just the 1 hit. Notice our power at this range is nil, so we're just going to roll a d6. Remember, we're at medium range. If we were at short range, we would add 1 to that roll, but because we're at medium range, it's just going to be a straight roll of a d6. We have to beat the target's armor of 6, and with a 1, we have missed. If it fails to roll any hits, well, wait a minute. We hit, we just didn't do any damage. But because we had to make a power roll, we have to place what's called a friction marker onto this ship. For every die rolled in such manner, we place a friction marker on the ship. For every time we beat the armor, we have to place a damage marker as well. So we're going to use yellow chits for friction and red for damage. We didn't have any damage, so we don't have to worry about that for this turn. And then we have some cleanup to do. That's the last phase of the turn. The end phase is where you resolve stalls. If you have airplanes on the table, you'll move those. If we had any damage, we would apply that. We don't, hopefully in the next turn, so we can see what happens. And then ultimately, the last thing you do is remove friction. We did not use any of our command dice this turn. That's because I'm still working my way through the basics of the game. We'll try to get to that next turn. We are back to the initiative phase. Remember, we're looking for 4s. The Americans get a total of 4. The Japanese get none. And we may want to take advantage of those this turn. This time the Americans say, you know what, I want to know where you guys are going. Why don't the Japanese admiral, why don't you go ahead and move your ships first? I think I forgot one thing. This is the table situation after movement. This ship fired and failed to score a single hit. It had a potential hit, but not a damaging hit. Whenever you do that, you have to make a command check to see if you are out of ammo. And on a 4 or better, you are not. So he is not out of ammo, and we can go back to resolving our shooting. I do want to show you what these command dice can do, however. So I'm going to issue a couple of commands. Now you can use those command dice to automatically, you give a command to the ship, they automatically pass an ammo check. So had we failed that one, we could have said, oh, you know, the Japanese had one command. They could use that so he's not out of ammo. Either way, he's not. So for those command, but the funny thing about these command things are they're not true power-ups. They're just an option for you, because all of these have, while you get a little bonus, you pay for it. And not just in terms of the command dice, you also pay for it in terms of game stats. For example, you can order a crash dive, which doubles a ship's lift stat for the purposes of diving. So if this guy's at 4 and he decided he wanted to drop down 2 elevation bands, remember he's got a lift of 2, he can go down 2 every turn. If you use one of those command dice, he can drop by 4, and he picks up the 4 speed for doing that. However, he can only use direct fire and point defense weapons. All firepower is reduced by 2, meaning because they're doing a screaming dive, their gunnery is going to be affected. It's going to be at a negative, a penalty for that. Well, okay, so you've got a limited resource here, but every time you want to use it, whatever power up you take, you get also another negative. So it's a little odd in that respect, but who knows? It probably works if we take our time and work our way through it. We are now back to the gunnery phase, which means and funny thing, look, this is one of the subtle ways the game reveals itself to you slowly. Notice that our Task Force Weeb Hunt here, this Kasuga class cruiser does not have any bow or stern fire arcs it doesn't have any stern fire arcs. The only effect it has on the bow is its torpedo. But since we are firing out of our port side, he can fire the medium battery and the light battery. And the medium battery is going to be at, let's call it 8 inches just for the sake of having some fun. So he's going to be able to roll a total of 2 dice for that and 1 for that. Does that mean I'm rolling 3 as a single attack? I don't think so. I think I have to roll 2 for this one because if I miss, we make an ammo check. And 2 for this one because if we miss, we make an ammo check. They are both at an altitude of 3, so that does make it a little easier. That means all we have to do is roll 2 dice for the medium battery, looking for 4s, and we get 2 hits. And for the light battery, we get a miss. So the light battery has to make an ammo check, and he passes that. Ooh, turn around, Bright Eyes. All right, now we did get 2 potential hits. That's going to generate 2 friction. Taking a look at the firepower, we are at +1 for the medium battery for both of these, and we're shooting at a ship that's got an armor of 7. So we need to roll 6s to hit. So we do 1 damaging hit and apply 2 friction. The Tsushima-class cruiser can fire shots at both of these guys here. He's got a light battery, and they can fire in the bow and the port, and one that can fire in bow and starboard. So I think both of these guys are in near the bow, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to roll 3 against him and 3 against him. Again, we're looking, now this time it's going to be 3 shots. We don't lose any dice because they're at the same elevation. And with the 3 shots, we're going to generate 2 friction. And of those friction, neither will be penetrating hits, so we have to make a command check. And we roll 1 die, and with a 6, he does still have his power. But we do drop a couple of friction here. The boys on the ship are taking fire, and while it hasn't penetrated the hull, it's still a bit disconcerting. So we'll roll 3 for this. We only get 1 hit, and we roll for the firepower of +1. 5 + 1 is a 6, and that means we have a friction and a damage. Like so. So a couple of damage for the Americans, and then we have one more ship that has, again, we can fire bow, and again, these are different weapon systems. I feel like the game would be expedited if I could combine all of these into a single attack roll. You can't just combine all the dice, particularly if you're using different batteries. You can't, but I still think since these are both light batteries, rather than rolling 3 dice and 3 dice, why wouldn't I just roll 6? Be that as it may, this ship is going to take a beating because I'm going to make the 2 shots. So there's 2 hits, and then for that second shot, we're going to get another 2 hits. That means we have to roll 4 times. These are going to be with a firepower of 1. We are looking to score a result of a 6 or better. So on 5s, we get 2 damage markers plus a friction. So this particular American ship is going to wind up with 3 damage markers. And I need to find out if friction gets converted into damage or not. Yeah, it looks like you put friction down, and then for basically every time you roll to wound, you put a friction down. And then some of those, so I'm going to need a couple more friction on this guy, aren't I? Man, there's a lot of friction in this game. So the friction does not convert into a damage roll. The friction just stays, and then you also have the damage on it. All right, well, I think we're done with the gunnery. So then we move on to the end phase, and there's a couple of things we can do. We could issue one of those commands for the Americans to help deal with some of this damage. Oh, I don't know if I rolled for the Americans, to be honest with you. I did not. So let's do that. That's why there's no damage markers here on our Japanese. We'll clean up a little bit here, okay? Our Denver-class cruiser is going to be firing we said we were at 8 inches going one way, so we'll go 8 inches the other. Let's just slide him over so it's definitely 8 inches. So now the Bainbridge has 1 shot out of its bow, and at 8 inches, he's going to fire 2 dice. And we get 1 hit, so that's 1 friction on the big boy. And we fail to, well, the firepower is +2 at that range. So that 3 becomes a 5, but we need an 8. So that doesn't do any good. Now we have to make an ammo check, but the good news is the American vessel has a really good commander. We roll 4 dice, and as long as we get a single success, we're not out of ammo. So we're not. These dice, remember, are our command dice. We can issue those as commands. That's the first of our batteries. We also have a medium battery to, I think the only ship that is close to within range is this guy. Now we get to see what the... Oh, you know, he does not have a torpedo. I don't think anybody has a torpedo that can hit. This guy does, and we lined him up precisely. So look at that. Oh, he's got a shot, a glancing shot. Now, the way torpedoes work, I'm going to grab one of these white chips because torpedoes, he has a total firepower of 4, and they have a speed of 8. So this torpedo can go up or down 3 elevation, and it will travel 9 inches. So I got 4 torpedoes inbound, blam, 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 blam. And they have a firepower of 2 when they hit. And the fun here is that we'll roll the 4 dice, and we get a total of 2 hits. If we had an American vessel parked right here, that vessel would then suffer these 2 hits. The torpedoes that missed the Japanese vessel, so remember the torpedo is going to move a total of 9 inches before it runs out of fuel. So if we had an American over here, then we'd have to make an attack roll on that ship. So you got to make sure that you know what's in the background when you're shooting. Be that as it may, our power die is +2. So we'll roll d6s +2. We are going to be damaging this cruiser on a result of a 5 or better. And we do no damage. So blank, blank. I guess we didn't set the fuses properly, and that will be it. So no damage to the Japanese. Now, during the end phase, we have to roll to see what this damage is, and there's a little damage chart. We roll once on it for the flagship, and with a result of an 8, we get, and this is why I would really like a quick reference sheet. I just haven't had time to build one myself. An 8 is a hull breach. Reduce the ship's armor by 1. Notice how so far we've struggled to do any hits because most of these armors are 6 or 7. When your firepower is only +1 or 2, you really need to roll a 5 or 6 to hit. Our flagship has been reduced by 1. His armor is now 6. It will be easier to hit this guy. But we can remove the damage marker. Now we have to roll 3 times for the American escort here, and we get a result of a 4 and a 10 and a 9. The 4 is weapon destroyed, critical damage. One of the main turrets, randomly determined 1 battery weapon system. It is unusable until repaired. That was the 4. And then for the 9 and the, I forget what the other one was. I think it was 10. Those are hull breaches. The armor will be reduced by an additional 2. So that guy's armor now becomes 4, and we have to select 1 random system. I'm going to roll a d6. And on a 1 or a 2, it will be his light battery. On a 3 or 4, it will be his point defense. And there it is. Point defense. Oh, I forgot to do that. Does this guy, once you're hit by the torpedo, so we move, if you have point defense, then the ship that is attacked can make a point defense attack against the torpedoes, and every success removes 1 torpedo from the game. So if we had these 4 move in, and if he had point defense, he'd make an attack. If he scored 2 successes, we would only make 2 attack rolls, because only 2 torpedoes actually made it home. And not even that would be the case, because if those both missed, the 2 that are not destroyed by point defense will continue on as we discussed. But that's where we're at right now. The next thing we have to do is we do have an opportunity to repair our damage. Not the hull breaches, not the reduced armor, but the weapon system that was knocked out might be brought back online if we can make a, let's see, which ship is that? He's got a leadership of 4. We roll all 4 of a dice for our captain, and look at that, our point defense come back online because we successfully repaired it. Then our commanders make a command check. The American, although, because we do want to remove friction, but I want to check that command because there should be a command that allows you to do that. You can do damage control. The ship can reroll all failed repair dice. The drawback is the airship may only use direct... Oh, this is a battle command. You can't use these in the end phase. You can only use commands during the movement phase and the attack phase. I got to remember that. Be that as it may, our commanders each roll their command dice. That will be 4 dice for the Americans, 2 for the Japanese. The Japanese get none, the Americans get 2. This means the American has to remove 2 of his friction. We'll remove both of the friction off of our commander. Any ship that still has friction on it suffers a -1 to hit on its battle dice. Whenever it fires a weapon system, it loses 1 for... If it has any friction markers, it rolls 1 less die. And you've seen that the number of firepower dice we have is really only 2, 3, or 4. So losing 1 of those is kind of a big deal. It really will cripple your ship, and you want to take care of that as soon as possible. That then becomes the end of the turn. I should point out, you have to remove friction for every success you get. If we didn't have any friction on our side, and we roll these dice and we get 3 successes, let's suppose we had these 2 and we rolled 3 successes, we'd pull 1, 2, we'd have to pull friction from the enemy as well. I'm not sure why that's the case. That's interesting. But that's the basic mechanics of this game. Movement is alternating, and now that we kind of got a handle on this, I think we're ready to kind of sit down, drop a proper, maybe do a 20-point battle with some battleships. I think one of the issues that I may be facing here is that all of these tiny little ships fighting these tiny little ships just means that we don't have a whole lot of dice being rolled for those damage. Although, to be fair, the fact that the Yankee Doodle flagship only has an armor of 6 and this cruiser escort only has an armor of 4 means that they're really going to be hard up. They are going to start suffering more and more damage. When your armor is reduced to 0, there's a thing that says you go into basically a crash dive, and every turn all you can do is move forward, and you lose a point of elevation until, if you can't get your system back online, you are forced to land, or you crash, and either way you're out of the game. So that's the basic mechanics of how this game operates. I'm not sure it's good for filming. That may be why I'm the only guy to play this on camera, because it does seem like it's awfully fiddly with a lot of little markers and a lot of... I'm going to go back and I'm going to check some threads on Lead Adventure Forum. I kind of think the game would be well served by saying, you know what, declare your attacks against the individual ship, and maybe I just need to combine different color dice. Hey, I've got a medium battery and a light battery, and that means I'm rolling 3 dice for the medium and 2 for the light, so I know that I got 1 hit with the medium, and then I know that I can roll at my +2 firepower. So I got a 4, so I didn't do anything, but at least I dropped a friction on him so that on the next turn, he's more likely to hit me. The game seems to be heavily weighted towards defense, which is probably well in keeping with World War I naval fights. I think that the armor exceeded the weaponry much more. It wasn't until World War II when the firepower of the weaponry was able to catch up to basically the maximum thickness of steel that was practicable for a warship. But as I said, this is a whole new genre for me, so I might be talking on my butt there. If I am, let me know down in the comments, because I like it when you guys explain to me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and particularly when it comes to those historical little tidbits. This is us helping each other out, making the hobby better, making the world a better place. Thanks for watching. Till next time, I'm praying for you.